2:39 in the morning, Bay of Biscay, May 1943. A German U-boat is on the surface, charging its batteries. 4 men stand watch in the dark. Below their feet, a detector called the METOX is switched on, its aerial turning slowly in the wind, listening for the one thing that could kill them. It hears nothing. The reading is 0. A quarter second before the light hits them, they hear an engine in the sky. Then 22 million candle power turns their conning tower into a stage. 6 depth charges straddle the hull. 47 men go down with the boat. The METOX is still reading 0. It never stops reading 0. It was built to hear one frequency, and the aircraft that just killed them was using a completely different one, a piece of technology German scientists had told their own navy, in writing, did not exist. This is the story of how 2 men nobody had heard of, working with a hand drill and a block of copper in a university basement, won the Battle of the Atlantic before most admirals even knew there was a new battle to fight. Here's the part of this story that's easy to get wrong, so let's get it right from the start. The METOX detector wasn't a bad piece of equipment. It wasn't German incompetence. For 8 straight months, it worked exactly as designed, and it saved an enormous number of U-boat crews. British aircraft hunting U-boats in 1942 used a radar called ASV Mark II, broadcasting on a wavelength of roughly 1.5 meters. The METOX, manufactured in occupied Paris, was tuned to listen across exactly that band. When a British aircraft swept its radar beam across a surfaced U-boat, the METOX heard the pulse from 30 miles out. The alarm rang. The captain ordered a dive. The boat vanished beneath the waves long before the aircraft ever got close enough to see it. It worked so well that in the first 20 days of March 1943, German wolf packs sank more than 500,000 tons of Allied shipping. The official historian of the Royal Navy wrote afterward that the Germans had never come closer to severing the lifeline between the New World and the Old than in those 20 days. Admiral Karl Dönitz, commanding the U-boat arm, had 240 operational submarines more than he'd ever had, more than Germany would ever build again. He believed, with good reason, that he was winning. His scientists had told him something else that made him even more confident. They told him the British couldn't build anything better. The director of Telefunken's radar laboratory, a respected physicist named Wilhelm Runge, had made a formal argument to the German Air Ministry. Centimeter wavelength radar, he said, was a dead end. The waves would bounce off targets like light off a mirror. Any return signal would be too weak to detect, and no transmitter on Earth, he insisted, could generate centimeter waves at any meaningful power. The physics, as far as Runge understood it, simply didn't allow it. In November 1942, on his recommendation, the German Air Ministry shut down its centimetric radar research entirely. The decision was reaffirmed in January 1943, right as the Wolfpacks were posting their best numbers of the war. Runge wasn't a fool. He was a serious scientist making a defensible argument from the data he had access to. The problem was that his data was 2 years and 7 months out of date. Go back to February 21st, 1940. University of Birmingham, Physics Department, the Poynting Building. 2 men are in a basement workshop. Neither of them is famous. John Randall is a lecturer. Harry Boot is a research fellow. Their department head, an Australian physicist named Mark Oliphant, has an Admiralty contract to build a transmitter that can generate serious power at a 10-centimeter wavelength, the exact thing Wilhelm Runge would later insist was physically impossible. Oliphant looked at the best American technology available, judged it inadequate, handed the problem to Randall and Boot, and went back to his own work. They had no production line, no theoretical breakthrough waiting to be written up. They had a workshop, a hand drill, and a solid block of copper. Their idea was almost embarrassingly simple in concept, even though making it work was anything but. Take an old device called a magnetron, drill 6 cylindrical cavities in a ring around its cathode. Each cavity resonates at a frequency set by its own dimensions. Electrons crossing the gap, twisted by a magnetic field, excite those cavities into oscillation. Because the whole device is solid copper, the vacuum lives inside the metal itself, no fragile glass envelope, no thin walls to fail under power. The heat just bleeds straight into the copper around it. They machined the block. They sealed the cathode ports with 2 halfpenny coins and a smear of wax. They pulled a vacuum. They switched it on. The neon indicator lamps on the bench began to glow. Wavelength 9.8 centimeters. Power 400 watts. 2 men with a hand drill had just built, on a Wednesday morning, the exact device an entire national physics establishment had declared could not exist. By June, GEC's works at Wembley had a sealed production version. By September, it was producing 100 kilowatts. Within a year, 1 megawatt, roughly 1,000 times more powerful than the best American equivalent of the same period. 1,000 times. Hold that number. Every U-boat that died in the spring of 1943 died because of that factor of 1,000. In August 1940, with the Battle of Britain still raging overhead, Winston Churchill made an extraordinary decision. He agreed to hand the device to the Americans. The magnetron, serial number 12, off the GEC production line, crossed the Atlantic in a locked metal deed box. The physicist, carrying it, Edward Bowen, slept with that box at his feet for the entire voyage. He opened it in Washington on September 12, 1940. The American official historian of the war later wrote that the men who carried it across had brought, in his words, the single most valuable cargo ever delivered to American shores. The most valuable cargo, not gold, not gems, a block of machined copper the size of a paperback book. Subscribe to WW2 Forgotten Frontlines. The British weapon adapted from that magnetron was called ASV Mark III, built at the Telecommunications Research Establishment, derived from the same bomber radar technology known as H-2S. It operated at 10 centimeters. It could find a surfaced U-boat at 9 to 12 nautical miles, in total darkness, in any weather. It was paired with something even more theatrical, the Lee light, a retractable 24-inch carbon arc searchlight mounted in the belly of a Wellington bomber. Invented by an RAF officer named Humphrey de Verde Lee. The radar would find the contact at 9 miles out. The pilot would close at 145 knots. At 1 mile, the light would snap on. At 300 yards, the depth charges would leave the rack. First used in combination in the summer of 1942. By spring 1943, with the new 10-centimeter set replacing the old equipment, the Germans had absolutely no answer for it. The METOX couldn't hear 10 centimeters. It was tuned to 1.5 meters, an entirely different part of the spectrum. From the night of March 1, 1943 onward, every surfaced U-boat in the Bay of Biscay was functionally deaf, and not one of them knew it. The receiver was on. The aerial was turning. The needle read 0. 0 because the equipment couldn't hear the threat, not because the sky was empty. The first kill came on March 20th, when a Wellington of 172 squadrons sank U-665. The U-boat's crew never heard it coming. The Allies gave the month that followed a name that has stuck in naval history ever since. They called it Black May. 41 U-boats died in May 1943, one every 18 hours. 3 convoy battles carried the weight of that month. ONS 5, where a gale dropped the convoy to walking pace for 3 days, and then a thick fog rolled in that blinded the German lookouts completely, but not the British escorts, who carried a centimetric shipborne radar built from the same physics as the magnetron. 6 U-boats died in a single night in that fog. None of their crews ever saw what killed them. HX-237, where a new American acoustic homing torpedo, a weapon that simply listened for the sound of a U-boat's own propellers and ran it down, claimed its first confirmed kill in the history of war, sinking U-456, and its commander, a Knight's Cross holder who had once crippled a British cruiser. An SC-130, where on May 19th, 2 escort ships fired depth-charge mortars at a sonar contact southeast of Cape Farewell. The bombs found U-954. U-954 was on her first war patrol. Among her crew was a 21-year-old officer named Peter Dunitz. 2 days later, in Berlin, the commander-in-chief of the entire U-boat arm received a signal informing him his son's boat had failed to report. 47 men, no survivors. Karl Dunitz was not a fool, and he was not a coward. 3 years earlier, his strategic instincts had nearly broken Britain's lifeline across the Atlantic, single-handedly. Now his son was dead. His boats were dying every 18 hours. And his most senior radar scientist's confident assurance that the British physically could not build what was killing them was sitting in the wreckage of his entire fleet's confidence. In his war diary, on May 24th, he wrote, in the formal language of a military record, that enemy radar had made battle in their previously favorable areas no longer possible. He pulled the wolf packs out of the North Atlantic entirely. Decades later, with time to reflect, he wrote something shorter. In May 1943, he said, "We lost 41 U-boats. We had lost the Battle of the Atlantic." The German Navy never figured out what was actually killing them, not in time to matter. They convinced themselves the METOX itself was leaking a signal that British aircraft were homing in on, and in July, they ordered it stripped from every boat and locked away. They were right that the METOX was useless. They were wrong about why, and that wrongness cost them months they didn't have. The actual answer had landed in their hands in February 1943. when a British bomber carrying the cavity magnetron was shot down near Rotterdam. German engineers recovered the device intact and gave it a name, the Rotterdam Gerät. A committee convened in Berlin 3 weeks later to study it. 3 weeks between holding the answer in their own hands and the first patrol that had already started killing them with it. The German countermeasure receiver didn't reach the fleet until October, by which point the Allies had already moved to an even shorter wavelength. Their new equipment couldn't hear either. At Nuremberg in 1946, Dönitz testified under oath that Allied radar was, in his words, second only to the atomic bomb, as the decisive war-winning invention of the war. The man who built the Wolfpack Doctrine said that, under oath, about a piece of copper from a basement in Birmingham. Strip away the statistics, and what's left is simply this. 2 physicists nobody had heard of, working with a hand drill and a problem nobody else wanted, beat an entire national scientific establishment that had concluded, on perfectly reasonable evidence, that the thing those 2 men built could not exist. The Royal Air Force's Coastal Command, never as famous as Fighter Command, never as celebrated as Bomber Command, lost 5,863 aircrew, flying 10-hour patrols across freezing water, alone, at night, for the chance at a single contact. Churchill himself said their war wasn't made of flaring battles and glittering headlines. It was statistics, diagrams, and curves the public never saw. Men like Flying Officer Stembridge of 172 Squadron, who scored the first centimetric radar kill of the war. Men like the crew of 86 Squadron, who delivered the first acoustic torpedo kill in naval history. They carried that copper blocks invention into the dark, night after night, and made it count. And on the other side, men like Otto Loewe of U-954 on his first war patrol, and Karl Dönitz's son Peter beside him, killed by physics their own scientists had assured them was impossible. Dönitz outlived both his sons. Peter died aboard U-954 inches, May 19, 43. His brother Klaus died in a torpedo boat the following year, on his 24th birthday. The admiral never fully explained how it had happened. In any document he ever wrote, he never really could. The answer was 400 watts of microwaves, generated by a block of copper sealed shut with 2 halfpenny coins and a smear of wax, on a workbench in a university basement, on an ordinary Wednesday morning in February 1940. That's the entire answer. That's the whole of it. If this story stayed with you, subscribe to WW2 Forgotten Frontlines. We go looking for the inventions, the instruments, and the quiet, unfamous men who actually decided the battles history remembers by their generals instead.